I'm excited to be here. Uh, this topic was a little bit harder for me to talk about than the Rams. And so as I put together slides, I really tried to think about what are the things we need the most from our ewes. And so I have a couple pictures kind of scattered throughout from some of my undergrads of our ewes here at the farm and things like that. But I wanted to kind of talk about this as a profitable ewe with a little bit of pun intended there, and that you guys should be thinking about your own profitability also selecting replacements and then your culling standards. What are the standards for your operation? So, as we think about this, what is profitability? Profitability, by definition from the Webster's Dictionary, actually says that it is affording profits or yielding advantageous returns and results. So, what does that mean? I think yielding advantageous returns and results can look a little bit different for all of us. And so if we can make this webinar maybe a little bit more interactive, I'd prefer to have questions throughout if anyone has them. I would like you all to maybe either type in the chat box, what is the goal of your operation? What are you raising your ewes for? Are you raising it for meat? Are you raising it for the lifestyle of your family? Are you raising it uh, for wool or cultural importance? What is the purpose of your operation? Or are you raising sheep for profit, right? To have economic profit or financial incentive to do so. And if some of you would rather just unmic and unmute yourselves and say what your objectives are, I'd love to hear that too.
Okay. Well, my objective, and this is probably like a long-term type thing, is to raise club lambs for my child until they get to that age. So that's my goal.
Okay, so we have a little bit of the lifestyle aspect in that, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and what we want to afford. So if we're meeting the goals there, profitability could look different in the fact that it's still giving advantageous returns to helping our kids grow up the way we want them to, right? So we're going to talk about some other things, and I want you to kind of keep in mind of what it may mean to be sustainable. Um, Usually, when sheep operations, people stop raising sheep, it's for various reasons. But in order for something to be sustainable, it usually has to fit kind of these three legs. This diagram here at the bottom that shows these three circles: environment, economic, and social. And so, for something to be sustainable, you generally have to have something that works in your environment. So, this diagram actually came from some beef from the beef producers. And so, you'll see reference to beef here, but it needs to be environmentally friendly or sustainable. It needs to be economically sustainable. So, generally, we have to make money. Even Mikkel, with her example of I would like to raise club lambs, at some point, if Mikkel was losing too much money doing that, I would argue that Mikkel would probably step out of that space. Am I right in thinking that, Mikkel?
Yes.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And social, right? There is a social aspect to this. And I think with the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project, there's a large cultural aspect to sheep production too. And so these things are generally what hold up something to be sustainable. And I think that sometimes with the lifestyle, we can look past the economics a little bit because maybe we're raising our kids the way we want to, or we have a second job that helps us out and we just want a little bit of extra meat for our family, or we want to raise a club lamb, or we want wool for a hobby. or to make another product, and that's all okay. But at some point, all of these need to contribute to our operations. And so, as I talk today, I think the attributes that we're going to talk about should lend themselves to help make the sheep for your operation be um, more sustainable or match your objectives that you are trying to do. So, first and foremost, and this is kind of why I said that this discussion is a little bit harder than talking about RAM selection, having the right U base. The ewes in our flock make up the vast majority of our animals. So this is the opposite of what I said several weeks with this group. We talked a lot about the rams and what a small percentage of the flock they are, and a lot of times they're the big kind of showboaty animals we love to have people look at, and our ewes sometimes don't get enough attention as they really deserve because they are the working base to making our operation function and be sustainable. And so we need, first and foremost, ewes that can work on our operation. In another slide, we're going to talk about different types of breeds of sheep and what they offer to the table and how we can take advantage of that. We also should be setting standards for ourselves. So, with the example of Mikkel wanting to raise some show lambs, she would have some standards for herself that her ewes, if she was raising her own ewe lambs, her ewes would have a certain standard that she would want them to adhere by. So maybe they need to raise a lamb that is a certain weight at weaning, or maybe she really likes the kind of hair on the leg that makes it kind of look fluffy. Or maybe we're raising churro sheep and we really want white wool and no color in our churro wool. And that would be a standard that we set and that we adhere by. We'll talk more about that also when we talk about culling standards. And then lastly, our ewes should offer long-term flock improvement. And I say long-term because oftentimes we may be chasing multiple goals and objectives, and some of them take longer to get to than others. Now, there are certain traits like carcass traits that are very heritable, and it we may make progress in that thing really fast. But if we're trying to breed ewes that are good mothers and that work on very extensive rangeland or maybe can operate with very little feed in a desert environment, it may take more time to find animals that can do that and that can do that well. And then once we find them, we start giving them new standards of now you can operate in this environment, but we also want you to raise two lambs. And so these are the things that we should be looking at when we're talking about our U base and how we want the workforce of our flock uh, to do. So here are some different breed types, and there's a lot on here, and I apologize that I don't have them all labeled of different breed types, but you may recognize some of them. Some of them are very distinct, some of them are very popular in the United States, through New Mexico, through the Navajo Nation. I've even seen multiple of these breeds, and all the way up into Utah and across the world. So, first and foremost is this Ramblay. I have them split into kind of three categories. There are more categories of sheep, and this is just kind of very basic categories. And some of these animals actually fall into other categories, but what we generally want to think of for our base flock is we want good mothers. We want good maternal animals because those traits of a good mother are generally hard to select for and they take a lot of time. And so if we first and foremost choose a breed that can is hardy, is well fit and adapted to our environment and is a good mother, that's generally a good base to start from. So here we have three examples under maternal breeds. So we have the Rambouillet in New Mexico. I know there is also D. Belay, which is kind of the cousin of the Rambouillet. This is known as a very hardy breed. They generally have pretty good wool. They work well in tough environments, and they're generally good mothers with a good twinning rate. Just below that, we have the churro, which is widely adopted in your guys' region, and it is probably the poster boy of adaptation for that environment. It's a smaller frame. It does well in that desert environment with little feed, very hardy animal, and also has a wool type that lends itself to cultural important things like weaving rugs and things like that. And then at the bottom, I had thrown in three hair sheep across these categories. Recently, and I'll show some slides. Recently, I went to the American Lamb Board Summit talking about sheep in the United States. And now in the United States, almost a third, about 27 or 28% of all sheep in the United States are now hair sheep. And I think that will continue to grow for a little bit. It'll probably start leveling out, I think. Um, but so I included these three hair sheep breeds. This first one with the lambs by it is called the Katahdin. They're actually the number one registered breed in the United States. So kind of indicative of saying they are the most popular breed, very popular in the South and in parasites or in places where there's a lot of parasites. So they actually do really well with parasites. They were developed near the equator where there's a lot of parasite load. And so, out of natural selection, the animals that came from that region do pretty well with parasites. Now, if we look at the terminal animals, you can see some differences here across both the hair sheep and the wool type sheep. Here is our suffix, so this would be more conducive to our club lamb type example that Mikkel said. Sometimes we have hamp crosses, and these are really well muscled animals, generally larger framed animals. And you can see in this picture that there's lush green grass all around them, right? This is not something we see a ton of in New Mexico. I think there are some places that are much more have much more growth than others, but I think these animals have developed in areas where there's a lot of available forage. The next one down is the Columbia. This is a pretty popular composite breed that was developed in the United States. But what I wanted to point out with this picture, even though they can be really good mothers and are known for being good mothers, they they are very big sheep. I mean, look at the size of them compared to some of these men that are holding them. These larger framed animals do take more feed to maintain that large body than something like a smaller Rambouillet or a churro type sheep. And so, depending on how much available forage you have on your operation that you need to buy, or if you're grazing on rangeland in that desert environment, these animals are going to need a lot more groceries, I'll say. And then lastly, for the hair sheep is the Dorper. And so this is developed in South Africa. He's much more muscled version of a hair sheep compared to the Katahdin and our other hair sheep over here. And so he would be kind of equivalent to the Suffolk, but with hair sheep. They can do pretty well in hot, arid environments also, and but maybe aren't quite parasite resistant in comparison to the Katahdin or the St. Croix. And so not all hair sheep are created equal, but he does muscle really well. I wanted to point out a couple breeds that are pretty kind of special. There's a longer list to this, but these three breeds are the Dorset. And so these are horned Dorsets. They're very unique and they stand out with those horns. But they are kind of the breed that can breed out of season pretty much any time of year really well. And a lot of their genetics have been put into other composite breeds so that they can also breed out of season well. The breed just below them is the Polypay, and this breed has really gained popularity in the Midwest, and they are very prolific sheep. So they have really high lambing rates, oftentimes over 200%. So here at USU, we have Polypays, and they're not even as prolific as some other flocks, but we had a 220% lamb flock, meaning that every ewe had 2.2 lambs on average. So there were lots of triplets and even quads that were being born this last year. And then lastly, this breed is called the St. Croix. They were developed in the Virgin Islands and they are very parasite resistant. Also, very maternal, very calm type sheep. And so, the Croix and the Katahdin are kind of the same, but really well known for parasite resistance. And so now we kind of see, well, here's all these different kinds of sheep, and I used to think at one point I would love to develop a new breed of sheep that does something really good or better than everyone else. And it's hard to think of a new breed because there's so many breeds of sheep that do stuff really, really well. Um, so thinking about all these attributes of these different sheep, especially as our maternal ewe base, our working flock at our farm, um, we should be thinking, well, what are the ewes that we want to keep on our farm that will offer the most advantage to us? Thinking back to our objectives, right? We're trying to meet certain objectives, but some things that we can agree on is they should be reproductively sound, independent of breed. They should be able to breed and have lambs for us at least every year, right? So we want to make sure they're fertile, they have a good lambing rate, because you have the more twins you have, the more money you will make. The lambing ease, we want to make sure that the ewes that we have aren't going to be difficult to lamb, and we want to make sure their udder structure and teats are good. And so sometimes you can be breeding ewes and accidentally the teats are getting too big, and then the ewe lambs have a tough time latching onto those teats and nursing, and that can be a problem. So udder structure actually becomes really important, and teat placement and size also becomes very important too. And then growth rate and frame size. So this is really a balance between your mothering traits and kind of the things that are hard to measure and your market prices. And so for this, I put these two pictures of these sheep here. So here we have the Rambouillet, and then we have the Suffolk. Our Rambouillet we know is a little hardier. It does well in tough environments, and they can be a smaller frame size, so they're not going to have to eat as many groceries. But to get similar amount of work out of the animal, out of a Suffolk, we're probably going to have to feed them quite a bit more to reach their genetic potential for growth and for muscle. If they're a much larger animal, they're going to need a lot more groceries to maintain. And maybe some of you have teenage kids. I have a kid who's becoming a teenager right now, and you have one son that's really large and one son that's smaller, and oftentimes one eats you out of house and home. And so I think that's important to balance well, which one is going to work in your environment, but and which one would be harder to work in your environment on the maternal aspect, but in the end, this may offer a more market price. So, Mikkel talking about the show lambs, these are kind of the standard of the show world. They're bigger muscled. They're fun to look at because they're big and impressive. But what's beautiful about the sheep industry, especially those of us having sheep in our backyards or on rangeland, we can utilize these animals that have really good maternal traits like milking or wool or hardiness, and then we can cross them onto a sire, like we talked about last time with our ram selection, and then we can get a cross of these two, and we can take advantage of this genetic ability to do well. Um, Another thing we'll talk about is wool quality and yield. So, a couple things I wanted to talk about is some slides that I was able to see from a scientist. Her name is Dr. Carrie Wilson. She works in Idaho at the United States Sheep Experiment Station in Du Bois, Idaho. And she gave a presentation at the Lamb Summit that I attended a couple months ago. And she talked about the profitability and the lifetime longevity of ewes on rangeland. And so, given that a lot of us in New Mexico and probably on this webinar do run on range and graze range, this I think really hits home with some of us. So, she did an analysis of the flock that they have at the US Sheep Experiment Station, and she gave some points just to point out, right? They have seasonal movement there, so that may be a little different than the grazing allotments we have if we're on the Navajo Nation or somewhere else in New Mexico. But they do have some seasonal movement going up in the mountains and then coming back down in elevation. They do have herders. Their animals travel long distances, and they have a lot of low quality forage, which is, I think, similar issues we have that impact teeth, and it also can be difficult terrain on their feet and legs and sometimes udders. So the one thing they don't have that you guys probably have more of is cactus, right? So sometimes you can have cactus in the wool or maybe in between the hooves, or it can hurt the udder if it impacts it. And then all of us, I think, deal with predators. Um, Another thing that you can put on here are dogs. And so if your animal has been attacked by dogs, that would be another predator I would add to this list. So many of the same problems that we deal with on our even backyard flocks, right? Or our range flocks. She stated in this presentation, very similar to kind of what we started talking about, the economics of the ideal Western range ewe uh, should be a ewe that lambs at a year old, that gives us twins every year would be ideal, and then weans roughly her body weight at 150 days. Now, this is a pretty long, drawn out weaning time, but if she can wean a higher percentage of her body weight, that would be more ideal. And then lastly, productive for a long amount of time, roughly 8 years. Now, this is a perfect scenario, and this is what she says is the ideal Western range ewe. Our longevity is probably a little lower than this in the United States, and she talked about that a little bit in her presentation. But here's one of the graphs that I want to show you that I think shows how important it is to make sure we have twins versus singles. So this is the lifetime kind of profitability of those ewes that have singles versus twins. Now, take in mind that every year you also have to raise these sheep, so you are putting money into them with drugs or with hours of labor, or cost of shearing, um, and feed, which is generally our biggest one, is feeding them. And so if you look across this, those ewes that have twins versus the ewes that have singles over time become much more profitable. And especially after 4 or 5 years of age, after they've had 3 or 4 lambings, they start to become increasingly more profitable than those ewes that are just having singles every year. And so having multiples can be a really big deal as far as the profitability and money that we're making. One thing that I would point out though is if you have a ewe that is out on range and had twins, but every year brings home one lamb. Well, if she was raising twins for a month or two, but brings home one lamb, well, now she's less profitable than the ewe that had a single and raised a big single. That big single will probably weigh more than your ewe that had twins but lost one and only came home with one. And so, you would cut down some of her return that year. And so we want ewes that will bring home all their lambs also. And so that's where good mothering comes into account, but also our management a little bit, right? We need to make sure we're taking care of predators and doing what we can there. This last graph from Dr. Wilson at the experiment station kind of shows, how over the lifetime of that ewe, if she's having twins, that around this her third lambing cycle is really when she starts really paying for herself and making a net profit for you. And the longer you can keep a ewe on your operation, the more return that you'll have from her. You spent all that time raising her to get to her to breeding age, and then every year you have to feed her, dump money into her, but the longer you have her, the more net return you have over time. And I think this goes to what can we do to ensure that we're selecting for longevity in our ewes and ewes that work in the environment that we want. Because even if we have a bigger, better market animal, but it doesn't live very long on our operation, we won't see that same type of return over time. Um, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type in the chat box. I'm not trying to go too fast, and I want to make sure that I'm clear on the things I'm saying. But as we talked about that list of things to think about of reproductively sound ewes, ones that meet our standards for wool traits or things like that, I wanted to talk a little bit about wool. There are differences. So if our objective is to raise wool, and we want to raise really fine wool to go into the commercial market and sell large volume of wool, we would want to select breeds that do that really well. Wool is a very heritable trait, so that means that you can make a lot of progress fast, but it also means you can mess it up really fast too. There are breed differences, and genetics is going to be the biggest contributor. So here are two locks of wool. We see that some is really fine. This would maybe be like a Rambouillet or Merino type sheep, very fine wool. And this is a much coarser breed of wool. You can see there's some hair or kemp in it. In the commercial market, this may not be as valuable. Now, if you were raising wool that didn't meet commercial expectations, you could still market that wool directly, or you could partially process it yourself, make yarn, or make a product, add value to that, and sell it into a niche market. And there's still a lot of value in that. And some people I know that may make more money doing that than they do than other people with really fine wool that sell it into the commercial market. And so here's a diagram of just kind of what's most important as far as cost, commercial cost on our wool and things that we should be thinking about. The two most important things that are going to make you money with wool are how much of it, so yield, how much of it are you producing, and how fine is your wool. There's a lot of other things that take into account. So making sure that it's not contaminated with too much, it says vegetable matter, but this is any organic matter like mainly feed, hay, cockerburls, things like that. Average staple length is important. Color. So in the commercial market, they don't like to see color in the wool. And then some other things. But this diagram here kind of shows how wool is different across the fleece. And so usually the coarsest part of the animal will be towards the back end of the animal. And as you go towards the front, it's finer. The shoulder is generally your finest wool. Um, and if we're testing wool, we generally take a spot right in the middle, and that kind of gives us a good average of what our wool looks like. Um, you can also see that there is a line on the belly where the wool kind of changes character, and that can be something heritable too. And so we just want to make sure that we watch these different aspects. Now, if we're raising churro wool and we have a market for that, that's where we get a lot into the breed type, how long it is, the character of it, the handle, how it feels in our hands, and color may be really important to some people buying this. They prefer a brown color or a black, and that may be one of your best marketing attributes. But in the commercial market, generally, we just want to see white. So. Now, I think we've talked a lot about the things that we should be looking for, right? But now I want to kind of talk about, well, what are some things that we should look for that would mean we're going to get rid of this animal? What are your I would like to kind of take a poll real quick. If you guys could type, if you have the ability, um, can you type in the number? Give me the two most common reasons that you have to get rid of ewes on your operation. So for one reason or another, they either go to the sale or they have to leave your flock. What are the most common reasons in this group here? Again, if you want to unmute and just talk in your microphone, you can do that too. Age of you. I like that's a really common one. I would say the most common age is around probably 6 to 7 is probably a pretty common age. If you don't mind, those of you who said aging, uh, why are you getting rid of that ewe? Are you getting rid of it because the teeth are too worn down, or she doesn't have a good bag anymore, or can't hold body condition anymore? What is more specific to her age? Another person said size. Uh, Brian, you said size. What is it? You're getting rid of animals that are too big or too small for you sending to market?
Mine would be poor motherly ability and bad udder.
Okay. Bad udder. I would say udders is generally in the top 3 to 5 things that people get rid of animals for. Mothering ability. It looks like someone chimed in and said teeth wearing down. And then Brian responded back and said too small. So uh, I'm assuming, Brian, you want to market a bigger animal. You're selecting for carcass, and that's what works on your operation. Um, so I'm gonna talk. We have some slides on all of these things, and so I'm gonna kind of work through some of them. And if you have other questions, feel free to answer. Now, I went through a graduate program in Wyoming, and my boss decided it was a good idea that I studied mastitis in sheep. And so I'm probably one of the few guys you'll meet that has spent a lot of time milking range sheep by hand and looking at a lot of sheep milk and mastitis. Um, so I wanted to talk about kind of Mikkel saying that she's had to get rid of some because of mastitis. Mastitis is essentially just infection of the udder of the mammary gland. And there's both clinical and subclinical mastitis. Clinical is the stuff we can see. Subclinical is stuff we really can't see very easily. So maybe subclinical mastitis, there's something going on and the lamb is growing slower, but we don't really know that there's infection in the udder. Clinical mastitis is like the udder is blue. It is warm to the touch or cold to the touch. The ewe won't let the lamb nurse on it. The milk is discolored. That's clinical mastitis. We can see that. Um, it's hard sometimes to catch it in sheep versus maybe a dairy cow or something like that because generally our sheep are out in a pasture, they're low to the ground, and it's hard for us to see up under the animal if they're having udder issues. And so, one thing we can do though is we can watch those lambs really closely for those first, especially for those first 30 days. A lot of the research I've done shows that if a ewe is going to get mastitis, it usually happens around the 8 to 10 day mark. And then after that, if conditions are clean, she usually does pretty well after those first couple weeks. So if we can watch those lambs closely for the first 30 days, that usually helps them survive better and we can catch cases of mastitis. So if you see a ewe has kicked lambs off, you may want to go flip her over and see if she has a bad udder, if she has mastitis and has kicked her lambs off because of that. One thing that we can do, and I'm going to switch back a couple slides just to show something real quick. Um, One thing that we can do that makes that a little bit easier for us. Oh, I thought I had a picture of it. Um, we can go ahead and paint brand our sheep. So we can paint brand the sheep. We can put a some paint here with a number two on them, and then we can put another number two on the U. And then that's really easy for me to look out in my pen and say, a number two lamb goes with number two U. And then we can also do that with twins, and we can maybe uh, put the paint on the back end of the lamb if it's a twin, or the U if it's on her hip. She needs to have twins. If it's on her shoulder, she has a single. And then I can look out and say, okay, that U's supposed to have twins, but she only has a single. Where's her single? Or where is her other lamb? And sometimes you can go find it. Or you see that another U has taken it on because she had issues. So if you bag your ewes after you've weaned your lambs and you notice there are hard knots or nodules, or you see something even worse, people often ask, well, do I have to get rid of that ewe? And I'm not here to tell anyone they have to do anything, but what I will tell you is the likelihood of her getting mastitis again is very high. In one study recently that was published, they reported 35%, but in other studies I've seen this number is much higher. So it's really, to me, it's kind of a 50-50 chance that she'll get it again, and probably even higher than that, because she probably doesn't have a great immune system, right? And so I would say that if your ewe does have those hard nodules in her bag, that you go ahead and try to cull that ewe because at some point she did have clinical mastitis and she's much more likely to have it again.
So,
Um,
Dad,
yeah,
so does that mean if that you had mastitis, would that be something that she could pass down to her twins?
well, most mastitis in sheep is generally environmentally caused, but
Hmm.
there is some research with dairy cows that shows the dairy cows, there is a component to their immune system that helps them fight off mastitis. And so there is some genetic component. But in the sheep industry, I think most of our issues are associated um, with the environment, not keeping clean enough pens or jugs and things like that. So if
Hmm.
you have a ewe that is 5, 6 years old and she just got mastitis because it was really rainy and it was prime environment for bacteria, that's not her fault. But the problem now is now she can't lactate as much. She's more likely to get it again the next year. And
Okay.
our expectations should be that she raises twins, not singles. So I'm hesitant to say there's a huge genetic component to it in the sheep industry. I don't know if there's been a ton of research really looking at that. Um, but what usually ends up happening is that we cull those animals. So after that, those genetics don't stay very long anyway. Does that
Okay.
answer your question, Mikkel?
Yeah. And I have another question. When it comes to treatment, we've heard that aspirin would be a good way to treat the sheep that has mastitis uh,
Yeah.
from your own cabinet, but I'm not too sure about, aspirin for sheep. I'm asking you if that would have been the case, but we lost her last year, but someone recommended an aspirin dosage of 350 milligrams.
Oh,
Sure if
I've Yeah, I've not heard that before. I would say having some antibiotics from your veterinarian would be the best thing.
yeah.
But even then, you end up culling that animal. And depending on how bad it is, so say
Hmm.
you catch it early, you could actually help to just milk out that animal every day.
Yeah.
And in some of the research I've done, we did a really crazy project last summer where we actually caused mastitis. We injected bacteria into their udder and we milked out those ewes 2 times a day. And within 4 days, a lot of those ewes cleared the mastitis. And then their milk started looking normal again, and their milk started increasing in volume again. And so ruminants are actually small ruminants, sheep and goats actually do pretty well in getting rid of it. And so even something as simple as milking them out every day. Now they may kick, and not want you to touch it, but doing that may help alleviate that. And they do that in the dairy industry with cows also.
Mhm.
But some antibiotics with that kind of treatment could help at least not lose the animal to clinical mastitis. So then you can at least sell them as a replacement late, or not a replacement, as a cull animal later.
Mhm.
Um,
So go
yeah,
ahead. Um, we didn't catch hers in time, and it came out that one side of her udder was really hot and hard, like it was kind of like a red type infection.
yeah,
Um, and we didn't get to we ended up having the left side of the udder completely all taken care of. It was just the right side that really caused a bad infection.
yeah.
Do you recommend when we get an antibiotic that if it's non-injected, can we have the other option to put it into the teat and put the
Yeah, so there
yeah.
there are some teat infusion medicines that you can get where you actually insert it into the teat to help with mastitis. They're just not very commonly used in the sheep industry, probably more used in the cattle industry because they can catch it faster than us. It's really hard for us to catch it early. And I'm going to show you a picture of an animal if anyone is squeamish. This animal was not caught early on, and actually she ended up sloughing off her bag. And so uh, this has happened before. I've seen this before, where these animals you'll go to reach under to bag them after a long season on the range, and they only have half of their udder. And so sheep are actually pretty robust animals. But this is why it's important to bag your animals and check for things like mastitis. So, Mikkel, there are some medicines that you can insert in the teat, but oftentimes, sadly, like this picture or your story, we just don't catch it fast enough to treat it very well.
Okay. Yeah, I was just questioning about that. In the aspirin dosage, someone just recommended
Yeah,
crush
I have
it and
not.
add it to the liquid base and drench it, but I wasn't
Yeah,
too
I have not heard the aspirin one before. Um, so the most common thing that you have all said is that teeth and age is the biggest factor that you get rid of animals for. And so we have a couple different, one, we have how we age animals. And so our 1 year olds, they have lost their two front um, deciduous teeth, right? Deciduous like a tree that drops its leaves, or milking teeth. And now it has one pair of permanent incisors here in this picture. And so 2 years old, then they have two pairs or four permanent teeth, and so on and so forth. But generally, after 4 or 5 years, or sometimes prematurely, if they're in really arid environments with a lot of sand, or they're eating a lot of sagebrush or things like that, it may wear down those teeth even more. And so here we have an animal that would be considered a full-mouthed animal. They've lost all their baby teeth and all their teeth are intact. This one you can see has started to lose some of those teeth. There's now wear in between the teeth and on top of the teeth. And so this would start falling into the broken mouthed category. And then lastly, we have animals that we actually call gummers. And so these are teeth that actually have lost all their permanent incisors. And so this is a picture here of a ram I worked with that you can see he had lost all of his teeth. I really love showing this picture because this ram, he was a Rambouillet Merino type sheep. I would do body or breeding soundness exams on him, and he would come in with a body condition score that was good. So that means that when he's on range, even though he had no teeth, that he could still maintain body weight. Now, if you had a ewe that had no teeth, um, and you needed to keep her, and she was maintaining body weight with no help from you, and she was giving you two lambs, she's a pretty effective ewe. But usually the story goes that once they become gummers, they just can't maintain body weight really well. And if they can't maintain body weight, they probably won't breed up. And so that does become one of the biggest reasons we get rid of animals that have really worn down teeth. And I see that happen much faster in the desert than it happens in other places across the country. Some other culling standards, reproductive failure. So use open ewes or ewes that don't bring home babies are not making us money. If it costs us, like Dr. Wilson said in her slides, roughly 170 or $180 to have a sheep at our operation every year, we need to make sure she's at least bringing home that much money or more. And so if she brings home no lambs, then that would be a pretty clear sign that we should get rid of her. Now, there are some circumstances that maybe it's not her fault, right? And so why ask yourself, why didn't she get pregnant? When she should be this kind of poster representation of the sheep coming home with two lambs. Did you have a bad ram? If you had a bad ram, probably means a lot of your ewes also didn't get pregnant, right? And so that could be an issue. Was it poor nutrition? Did she have a really low body condition score and just wasn't able to ovulate and raise a lamb? And was that due to worn down teeth, like some of you said, or was it due to something else? Or was there early embryonic loss? Maybe the ram mated her, but after that she was chased or attacked by a dog, and then she lost that lamb in utero because of that really stressful event. And so there are some things that maybe it wasn't her fault, but independent if it was her fault or another situation, you're not bringing home money with that ewe that year. And so depending on the size of your flock, you can make your own decision. Well, is it should I just get rid of her and get the money from a coal animal and keep a new lamb? Or do I not have the ability to get rid of her and I still need to keep her and breed her another year? But by getting rid of those animals that don't bring home lambs, you slowly choose for the most fertile or the best mothers in your operation. And so reproductive failure is a big thing. Another thing, and this actually goes to Mikkel, one of the reasons she says she gets rid of animals, is bad mothers. And one thing I want you to think of when you think of a bad mother is what is the cost she's going to cause you? And if she refuses to take her lamb, think of how much milk replacer costs, and it's generally not cheap. And so if you're buying a lot of milk replacer instead of that you just raising her lamb, I know that it seems like on the Navajo Nation there's a lot of really good alfalfa, and those ewes should be able to raise uh, good lambs with their milk from that alfalfa. We shouldn't be having to buy a lot of milk replacer. So some things we can do is give them subjective scoring, just little categories we put them in. So we can give them a lambing score. So the best one could be the ewe lambed normally by herself. We didn't have to intervene. She was able to do it great. The next score could be she lambed, but she needed a little assistance, but it's only because the babies were coming out the wrong way, or maybe one was breech, or two were trying to come out at the same time. So we gave her a little bit of assistance, but then she was able to do the rest herself, clean off the lamb, take care of it. And then lastly, for her lambing score, we could say the ewe went into labor, but she didn't dilate well, and so she had issues lambing. We may not want to keep her offspring. And if she has something really severe happen, like a prolapse, we definitely want to get rid of ewes that have prolapses because they won't fare well for another breeding. And there may be a genetic component to that, that their offspring may also have issues. The other subjective score we can do is mothering scores. So we can really, there's kind of two main categories. Either great mothers, they get to work, they clean off the lambs, they care for the next lambs that are coming. They're not so preoccupied on feed or other things, and that's where it's important for us to manage to make sure that they are healthy and well fed prior to lambing, so that they're not more concerned about eating than they are taking care of their lambs. Or the other category is a bad mother, ewes that didn't take responsibility to it. They abandoned their lambs. Um, and those we don't want to select for. Over time, if we select for good mothers, I promise you that your lambing barn management will be easier, your lambing season will be easier, and we can slowly select for those traits that are hard to select for, but probably some of the most important things we can do when we think about to be profitable, we need to have that you bringing home lambs and multiple lambs at that. And so I just challenge you guys to think about that. And then I'm going to kind of go quick through these next ones, but one thing that I do want to say when you do choose replacements, you also need to think you want to set up those replacements for success. So make sure your lambing time is good, that you're doing the things that make ensure their health. So we want to make sure that we're saving them from hypothermia, hypoglycemia. They're born in a dry, warm place, and they receive colostrum from their mother in a short amount of time. Iodine dip for their navel can be really important also to help from infection. But when we look at importance of colostrum, it becomes really important to do it those weeks before the ewe lambs. We give a shot to the ewe so she can build up antibodies in her colostrum, and that will give the lamb what it needs to then have a better immune system in your environment. And so CD&T is the most common of what I would recommend if you have other issues on your farm. Work with your veterinarian on what things you would need, but this Clostridium perfringens type C and D, so that's helping from overeating disease. And then T for tetanus is the bare minimum that we'd want to vaccinate our ewes with, and those roughly 4 weeks out from lambing, so that enough antibodies are built up. And we want to make sure that that colostrum gets into them fast because as the lamb gets older, it gets harder for them to absorb all the antibodies from that colostrum. And so we really don't want to wait past 12 hours for those lambs to get that colostrum from their mother. And so we want to make sure our ewes that we're going to keep are set up to be the most successful they can be. And that really starts weeks out from those lambs even being born. Um, so with that, setting your ewes up for success, thinking about all your objectives. I know that was a lot of information. There's still so much more we could talk about to having profitable sheep, especially in environments like some of you are raising sheep in. Um, and having animals that fit your goals and objective. If your goal is to raise sheep on rangeland like this, you may need something that's well adapted. If your goal is to have club lambs, you're probably going to want a bigger muscled animal. Or if your goal is to do something with wool, it may change. But uh, one thing that we should agree on is that longevity is important, twinning rates are important, and then reproductively sound, healthy ewes are what make us money and what is really important with the replacement ewes that we select. And so, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure what timeline we're on now, Mikkel, but
No,
thank
you're
you.
fine. Yeah, no problem. If you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or insert them in the chat box. Okay. Well, if you guys are still trying to think of your questions, I have a question. So when it comes to lambs, do you recommend that we give them um a shot that protects them from white muscle disease?
Yeah,
Is it
so I think so.
green?
White muscle disease is a selenium deficiency. And so it is very common to give newborn lambs, a shot of Bo-C, which is essentially an injectable form of selenium. That is very common to do. Our region in the US is actually very low in selenium. And so a lot of our commercial producers will have Bo-C available, and they'll just give that shot when that lamb is about 24 hours old or whenever they process it, they dock it or something else. But yeah, early on, BOC can be beneficial to them. But making sure their mom has adequate mineral even before that is also very important. So.
Okay. And is BOCI something that we have to get through a veterinarian, or is it something that's readily available in our, stores here in, say, closest one I say is Farmington?
Yeah, I think this question was brought up when we were in Farmington last time. Um, I need to actually look that up to see what that is. I thought that it was not, but I have also heard rumor that it is. Um, I'm looking it up right now.
Okay. If you guys have any questions, feel free to insert them in the chat box. I'm going to create our polls. I did not do it because I was so in tune with this presentation. I don't want to miss any of it, but give me a moment and I shall put those polls.
Um, thank you for those that said complimented on the presentation. From what I'm seeing, it does not look like it is over the counter anymore. I thought that it was, and so you may need to get a license from a veterinarian now to get it. It may be locked up with the antibiotics at the stores in Farmington.
Okay. But my question is, they're not an antibiotic.
No, no, it's a selenium supplement, selenium and vitamin E injection. So,
Okay.
um,
Do
but
you know?
because selenium you can cause toxicities with selenium. Horses actually are pretty I think back in the day, a bunch of horses died from selenium toxicity. The FDA actually has a lot of rules on the amount of selenium that can go inside of like a mineral package. But for sheep and goats, they actually require higher amounts of selenium for their body weight. And so oftentimes we aren't giving enough selenium if we're in a selenium deficient environment. Even though toxicities can happen, selenium is pretty well regulated by the FDA. Unfortunate for us as sheep and goat producers. So,
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chad.
yep.
Do we have any more questions from our audience tonight? I did go ahead and launch our poll, so if you don't mind, all of you that are on here to complete that poll for us, I would really appreciate it. If there are no other questions, I'll wait for a moment, and if there is no questions for tonight, then we'll go ahead and complete our webinar. Okay. All right. So that would complete our presentation for night. So thank you, Chad, for coming on here again. I know you
Thank you.
provided a RAM presentation, so there was a lot of folks that participated in that one. So thank you, thank you. And I'll be reaching out to you soon for a copy of your slides if you don't mind that we could share it on our platform. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay, so I did not quite fix this yet. So tonight was obviously our ewe replacement and culling webinar. We do have for next week is a poultry management webinar, and this one's going to be presented by Newton Hatchery, and they're coming out from Bloomfield, New Mexico. So they've been pretty popular when it comes to poultry breeds for 4-H kids. They choose their breeds here, and Darcy Newton is pretty well known in that area, and so she provides a lot of expertise when it comes to poultry management, the disease that you should be looking out for poultry, what's pretty common as far as disease go in local areas, and how you can treat them, as well as, the type of breeds that you want for just meat production or, egg laying. Do you want more of eggs coming out of certain chickens or those type of breeds that you want to look into? So there are a lot more to poultry management. So a lot more than what I've said as well. So if you would like to tune into that, I highly recommend it, and you can head over to our page. All right. So we do have this next upcoming event that's coming up soon, and it's going to be just around the corner pretty soon. Um, on the 26th, we have a livestock first aid workshop, and this is going to be starting at 8 o'clock all the way to 5 o'clock, and it will be taking place at the San Juan Miggy Park, and that's located in Farmington, New Mexico. If you just put that in your Google Maps app and just type in Miggy Park, it will take you directly to the park center. Our presenter slash demonstrator is no one other than Dr. Wenzel, and he's coming from New Mexico State University, and he's our extension veterinarian. So he's been doing our presentations for these first aid workshops for 3 years in a row, and so he is always come recommended, and he explains everything perfectly. So I highly suggest that you guys partake in this. You start planning on how to suture external minor wounds to having to be taught what the trick testing is, how it's involved, and what's the process of that as well. Vaccination, deworming protocol, and the administration route that you should be given these vaccines or antibiotics. So there's a lot of information to be covered. So if you are interested in that, I highly recommend you scan that QR code. So for those of you that participate throughout the whole day, we do have the first aid kit bags that will be distributed. So if you can just scan that QR code, and lunch is provided, so that's the reason why I ask for a number of people. And if you're bringing family members, we highly recommend that you implement their names in there as well. What I meant to be would put here was our invasive tree management workshop. We do have some local producers that want to know how to manage invasive trees, such as a Siberian elm tree. We do have, I think it was the Chinese elm tree, and that event will be taking place on October 2nd. I apologize for not putting it on there, but I will put it on there for next week as well. So our livestock first aid training, these are just a couple of pictures that I just want to share with you. You see in this corner here in the left top corner, we did have some suturing kits that we had some people work in pairs, like four people in one group, and they all learn how to suture um, the the tester right here. We did have 1 year a horse implemented into our training as well, but not that much people had an interest in the horse section. So majority of folks wanted just to have a insider on cattle and sheep. So some of these pictures are pretty blurry because the pixels are not that great. So the camera quality, I should say. We did have sheep demonstration, and here we had someone that actually used a kit bag that they participated in training, and they sutured up the sheep that they accidentally, I guess, cut during sheep shearing, I should say. And here's where we had some volunteers that wanted to partake in the hands-on category of vaccinating some cows. All right. So some of you suggested that we put on here the direction to go to locate our upcoming events. So if you just type in your URL, nsa.nmsu.edu, and this will show up on your homepage. So this is our homepage. Below it is just the goals and objectives of our NSA project. Up here on the top of the carnival slide here, you'll see home, our team, projects and programs, and upcoming events. So you click upcoming events and it'll take you directly to this page. So where it says registration is required, and that goes for all our Zoom and virtual content, you do have to register. So if you just click that register here, highlighted in red, it'll take you to another page, especially for the ones that do say for in person that registration is recommended. You can still register, but you don't have to. You can still come in person to sign up. So here's the NSA project team. We do have our project director who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. Myself, the project coordinator that handles all the project events. And we do have Shirley Toth who handles the conservation planning program. Carol Yazzie, who handles the USDA FSA programs. And we do have Emiliano McLean, who's our project specialist, but his role is more into the horticulture area. So he's highly specialized in that category than I am. Cheryl Toth, who's our project assistant that makes sure that everything in our NSA website is running properly, making sure that all of our events are posted and shared for our producers. So do we also have Tiffany Toth, who is the resource technician that handles the one-on-one um, assistance when it comes to CP planning with producers. So we do have social platforms already up and running. So our latest one is our NSA website. So if you just head over to our nsa.nmsu.edu, you'll be shown all of our upcoming events for the month of September, as well as October. We do share our upcoming events for the webinars a week before, and we try to share our in-person events at least 1 month to 2 months out, and they are located on our Facebook page. All of our virtual presentations are recorded and shared onto our YouTube channel. So if you, in case, have missed the live webinar, this is recorded and it will be soon edited and shared onto our platform. I want to introduce to you guys who we are as a project. So we're known as the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project, but in short, we're called the NSA Project. We are a New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service under the New Mexico State University, and we deliver in collaboration with the two of our major project partners that we deal a lot with when it comes to in-person events in webinars. Those are Dene College Land Grant Office and COPE, if you are unaware of what they stand for. It's Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. And our project is funded under the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Native Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. So our primary goal is to help producers with resources to improve their operations, both profitability and sustainability. Like I've mentioned from the previous slide over with our major project partners such as the Dene College Land Grant Office and COPE, we have invited a lot of their specialists, from their cattle specialist from the Dene College to their garden specialist, to provide insight in what has been requested from producers over the seasons. So if it's more dealing with tree pruning, we would bring someone from COPE. Or if it's from Dene College, we will also use them as well. Not only do we use these folks, but we also gather a lot of specialists coming from New Mexico State University when it comes to in-person events. So if most of you that have attended our in-person events, you probably have got to know Dr. Gifford, who is our NMSU rangeland specialist, and Dr. Marcy Ward, who is our livestock specialist, and not to mention Dr. Wenzel, who is also our extension veterinarian that comes down here a lot. So he's no stranger in these parts. He's been actually down here a couple times to provide a lot of resources for our Navajo producers. So, as secondly, is increase our producers' knowledge and use of USDA programs. So, we do have a virtual resource fair that we invite NRCS and FSA field offices locally, whether that is in McKinley County or San Juan County, and we provide then the platform virtually for producers to get to know what type of local programs in their local areas that they can apply for. As well as we had one time rural development from San Juan County kind of talk about some loan programs for first-time homeowners and risk management agencies as well from the state. And other resource providers, what I mean by this is we invite folks from the Navajo Nation Department of Agriculture, like Miss Jessie Jim, who is I believe it's the director for the Navajo Nation Department of Ag, who she provide insight and services on the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund and what type of programs are available. And lastly is increasing our local production and consumption of vegetables and healthy foods by Navajo families and individuals. So for this one, we provide a lot of resources when it comes to virtual content. We invite COPE with Miss Carol Palmer, who specializes in food preservation. And so we provide that both virtually and in person. Not to mention that we have a consultant that is going to be part of our team full time pretty soon. So we're happy to say that our horticulture program is going to be taking off in schools. And hopefully, through the Indian health clinics and family homes.